Hello chess friends, this is Master Valeri Lilov, and in our first lecture from the series, The Great Chess Masterpieces, I would like to present to you one very famous and beautiful chess game. This game is called the Extraordinary Windmill because of the combination with which it actually was connected to the chess history, and of course this game was added to the golden font of the chess beautiful masterpieces. So this game was played in Moscow 1925 at the international tournament, Grandmaster tournament, which was held there, and the player who actually created this very beautiful combination was not so popular. Maybe most of you haven't heard that name at all. Grandmaster Torre. I don't talk about the Filipinian Grandmaster Torre, which is was playing at the 20th century, but before him there was a Grandmaster called Carlos Torre, probably the strongest Mexican Grandmaster. So he was regularly playing at the beginning of 20th century, and that game he should have played against the world chess ex-champion Emanuel Lasker, and basically he won that game with a dazzling queen sacrifice. So this combination which he made in that game was immortalized and is known as the windmill. Okay, so it's also very important to mention that the defender who was playing with black this game was not anyone, but he was the great Emanuel Lasker, the second world champion, and this one game was probably one of the best for 30 or 40 years forward. So let me show you that. White played d4, and black just continued with knight f6. So knight f3, Torre is with white, and black played e6. So here white played the simple bishop to g5, and this move introduces the so-called Torre attack system, which is very interesting and offers to white very flexible development of his pieces, and mainly concerns about a quick attack on the black's kingside area. So bishop g5, a very interesting move, and at the head of the intense tournament battle, the young Mexican master, who was trailing Bogolubov and Lasker by half a point at this moment, throws down a challenge to his renewed opponent by developing his own patent fashion. So bishop g5, this is the so-called Torre attack. Black played c5, and white continued with e3. This is the main move in the Torre attack. White is supporting the pawn d4 and wants to keep that in order to be the basis of the further plan that he will have. So now Lasker did the move c takes d4, and since Lasker played it at first, it became one of the main replies to the Torre attack. However, in Alekhin's opinion, this is so-called an utterly incomprehensible exchange, because he says that black limits his own options while opening important lines for his opponent. Nevertheless, this is very popular moves and widely used nowadays. So e takes d4 followed, and black just developed his bishop on e7. So the main idea of black with this kind of c takes d4 exchange is to simplify the position and eventually get the d5 square with this knight. So it's a very typical idea in Torre when black tries with a move like knight to d5 to exchange the dark square bishops, and eventually with this to reduce white's attacking potential on the king side. So bishop e7, and now white just develops his queenside knight with knight b to d2. Here, if black continues with the simple pawn to d5, white will get the chance to play bishop to d3, and then next move, play something like, after bishop d3, knight c6, c3. Eventually he will play a move like castles, queen e2, knight e5, and that d5 pawn will be very helpful for white to promote his further attack with knight e5, f4, and so on, based on that important d3 bishop on the king's side. So black is not really intending to close the center and allow white to promote all of this. So instead, Lasker chose to play in a really tricky way, as continuing with the move after knight b to d2, d6. So the main purpose of the d6 move is to take away from white the e5 square for the knight, and meanwhile to create some flexible position with the development of the knight on d7, holding the majority of the important squares in the center, and then trying to develop the queenside bishop by b6 and bishop b7. So this is black's main plan, and he hopes to reach a good position. Okay, let's see. White played bishop to d3, and now black continued with pawn to b6. So here, white made a very interesting move, which seems to be not so easy to find, but really strong. The move is knight to c4. So Torre viewed this move as a part of a system, and the main point is that now the knight is playing a very good role in that square, because meanwhile he prevents black from playing d5, because that knight will then jump on e5, and in the same time white wants to play knight to e3, and that knight will make a very good job there. So black played bishop to b7, and white simply continued in this position with the move queen to e2. So white is simply developing his pieces, and black just continued with the development of his queen up to c7. So white castled, and till now it seems everything to go very usually. Nothing really extraordinary happens. So black simply castled, and white develops his kingside rook up to e1. So black did exactly the same by putting his own up to e8, and this is a very typical structure for white in the Torre attack. So white is keeping most of his pieces on very active squares, ready to jump on some of the important positions where they will be for the middle game and the eventual and create some threats to black. You'll see how this happens in the next couple of minutes. So white simply finished the development now by developing his queenside rook on d1, and now black played knight to d7, c3, and knight to f8. So black's idea in this position is to transfer his queenside knight from d7 to f8 and then g6, and mainly that knight will feel very comfortable in that position, because it will prevent white's bishop from having this very strong position or looking to the h7 square in black's kingside area, and eventually to eliminate some of the combinations up there. So now white continued with a very interesting positional decision. He played the move bishop to c1 on move 14, and now the knight is going to be regrouped to e3, and eventually he will keep the eye on the center. So now, when black plays actually a move like knight to d5 or something, then you see what Torre actually was considering to do. Well, if instead of bishop c1, let me just show you a sample variation. If he was playing knight e3 straight away, then black could have made his major idea in the Torre. Try exchanging the dark square bishops by playing knight to d5. And this is a move which is not really very pleasant, but nevertheless, in this position, white still have the chance to keep his better position by just exchanging the knights at first. Then when black takes, white exchanges the dark square bishop on e7. Black takes, and white makes a very interesting typical idea for the Torre by exchanging the light square bishop as well. So now black's most active pieces, the knight on f6 and the bishop on b7, were being exchanged, and then white is keeping a better play because he has more space in the center and two placed pieces there. So practically after bishop e4, white is standing better, so even in this case he would have continued with his own plan and of course his idea to promote the kingside attack in a quick way. But instead, Torre, for some reason, wanted to keep his dark square bishop on the board, and the point of this idea is mainly to reduce the space that black will have in his position. So now you see that bishop on e7, and the main reason why white didn't want to exchange that bishop was because that is the main piece that is making the queen to be away from the king side. So if that bishop goes and being exchanged, then the queen will probably find a way to be connected with the king side position of black. But now it's a difficult task, and that bishop is very unpleasant piece for black, the bishop on e7. So he continued with knight to d5 in this position, having the idea to put the bishop on f6 next move, and eventually then to improve the position of that piece. But still, it's not really easy thing to do, and white continued with the immediate start of attack by playing the move knight to g5. So now there are no really concrete threats on black's position, but still that knight is staying really dangerously looking to black's whole kingside area. So knight g5, and what should have black do in this position? What is the main purpose that white has with that knight g5 move? Well, it's very interesting, and it's typical for the Torre, white to make such maneuvers with his pieces, and the basic idea of this is to make black to do some weakening on his position. For instance, if he plays the obvious move of h6, now white has the idea to play knight to h3, and this maneuver is mainly concerned actually to make black's structure on the king side more awkward. So there are two things that white will do with this maneuver. At first, he will assure the further maneuvering of the c4 knight to e3, and now the knight on h3 is actually keeping the f4 square, because otherwise that knight on d5 was threatening to go on f4 and eventually exchange, after knight e3, exchange the dangerous light square bishop of white, which is very important, and white don't want to exchange that. So now that knight at first keeps the f4 square, and at second it provokes black to do some moves like h6 right now, and additionally to make his position more awkward by pushing his pawns forward. And there is one principle basically which says that when a player is leading an attack against the opponent's king, his opponent should never consider pushing the pawns from his king further, because it makes the kingside position more weakening, and of course, as you can see, at some point white can even think about some move like g4, g5, or queen h5 and bishop takes h6. Such combinations happen to be possible because that pawn on h6 is going to be badly placed there. So it will give white additional resources to build his attack and eventually find good combinations against black's king. So this is the main idea, and that's why Lasker actually estimated this very well, and he didn't want to push his pieces from the kingside position. That's why after knight g5 he played b5 in this situation. So his idea was to make that knight on c4 to move somewhere, and of course if he moves on e3 then knight f4 will follow, and as I told you, black will make his idea to exchange the dangerous d3 bishop. And if he doesn't do that and he plays a move like knight a3, then that knight on the queen side will be badly placed, so passively placed. So a very nice counter idea by Lasker, which was very important to be mentioned. And now he made the move b4, considering that this opening of the queen side will give black a better play. But still, maybe the position is equal, but white's attack on the king side should never be underestimated, as Lasker did. So let's see what happened further. White took on b4, and black simply recaptured with his knight, threatening on a2 and threatening to also to exchange white's strong light square bishop. So white could have considered to drop his bishop back to b1 at this point, but black would have do a move like queen to c6, attacking queen g2, and then probably after white plays queen g4, he will make a move like rook to c8, and this play on the queen side will be developed somehow in a quick way, and white's bishop on b1 will be a passive piece. So instead of this, Torre decided to begin the attack against black's king straight away, giving time black to find some opportunities how to make a counterattack on the queen side, and he found the move queen to h5. So now with this move, white is attacking on f7, and meanwhile he's attacking on h7. So black cannot really take on d3 right now, because white will simply take on f7 with an in-between move, and then he'll recapture with the rook on d3, winning pawn and breaking black's kingside position and pawn structure. So black has to take some opportunities to defend from it. He didn't like the move of g6 right now, because this will lead to some weakened squares on the king's side, especially the dark squares, and it is not really nice looking there to have all these pieces looking to these weakening squares, and of course black's king. And this was the reason that why actually black played bishop takes g5, and it is a very simple logical decision. Black tries to exchange more pieces, and this is one rule that you can remember. When a side is trying to defend from the opponent's attack, it's always a good idea to consider exchanging pieces, because by exchanging pieces the material is being reduced, and eventually the attacking side is losing the potential, and losing of course his resources to make some decisive threats, some combinational attacks against the opponent's position. That's why he followed that rule and just tried to exchange that dangerous g5 knight, but it doesn't really improve his position so well. And now white could have taken on g5 with his queen, and it deserved consideration, with the idea now if black takes on a2 to meet that move with bishop d2, and now that knight will be isolated on a2, or it will lose too much time to be improved from there. And eventually, if he chooses to take on d3 the bishop, then white can simply recapture this one with the rook, and then the rook is going to be very well placed on g3 or h3, and it is getting ready to attack black's king straight away. So that's the basic idea why black was not considering to exchange that bishop right now, because that b4 knight has always the chance to take it. And meanwhile, white had the chance now to transfer his rook up to the third rank in no time. So he is giving up his light square bishop, but as a compensation he's winning some more tempos to additionally strengthen his attack against the black's king. So practically, after queen takes g5, now, of course, white's position is good, but we should take the fact that if Torre played queen takes g5, the chessboard would have been deprived of the grandiose combination which has entered into the golden treasure of the chess under the heating the windmill. So Torre chose to play in more active way by taking on g5 with his bishop. So now, considering that bishop b1 is a potential threat, Lasker chose to take that bishop on b3 no matter what happens. But now, when white recaptures with his rook, it happens that the most important piece of white is neither the queen or the bishop or some of the rooks, but the knight on a3. And why and how exactly the knight can be the most important piece of white? Well, very easily. Since the knight is now holding the squares where black can eventually go through and make some certain counterplay on white's queen side with queen c2 or queen c4, that knight is the most important piece because it prevents black's counterplay on the queen side in going shortly. So this main reason is giving white the time needed to organize his attack on the king side and eventually make some decisive threats. So let's have a look how this exactly happened. Black played queen to a5, attacking the rook on e1 and making the idea if white just makes a move like rook to d1 to play f6, and now white will lose his bishop on g5. So Lasker didn't really realize how white will continue after queen a5, and this can be one test for you. You can just pause the lecture and eventually try to figure out how white continued in this position and what he actually played. So the move is simple. White plays b4, and it's not really the move that you can discover in a minute or two, but this move is probably the strongest in the game, because white's idea is now, if black takes on b4, to continue with the move bishop to d2, removing the bishop from the important g file, and now after black plays a move like queen b6, because there is simply no better square for the queen to go, white plays rook to g3 and yields a strong attack on both flanks, but sharper and non-dangerous is the combination, instead of rook to g3, for white to continue with rook to b1, attacking black's queen, and after queen c7, rook c3 will be possible. So white's main idea will be that after knight d7, white can even continue with a move like queen a5, and with this amazing sacrifice of the queenside pawn, white transferred his all pieces on the queenside area, and now there will be a threat like rook c7 on the way, and also some other threats like this. Also, as I told you before, after queen b6, white can continue with rook to g3, and now there will be some very dangerous threats against black position. For instance, a move like knight g6 can maybe met by a move like queen g4, let's say an idea of h4, h5 is on the way. So white's knight on a3 is protected, the bishop on d2 can be also put on c3 or some other position like this. So white's attack seems to be really not for underestimating, and this is the position in which Lasker didn't want really to go. So instead of taking the pawn, he considered to move his queen on f5. So the basic idea of this was to just put the queen on saver square to close to black's king, because in this way it will support him in a better way. So now white continued with rook to g3, just putting that rook in front of the king, and black played h6. So what now? How will white save that bishop, or is there any way to save the position at all? Well, there maybe is one, and maybe is not. It's your task to estimate if white has the chance to find something good for himself. And here is the move. Knight to c4, attacking the pawn on d6, and now the problem of black will be that he cannot really consider taking on g5 without getting any problems, because after h takes g6, g5, knight takes d6. Now, not only the bishop and the queen are being threatened, but also the rook. So black cannot really keep all of these pieces. And when he continues with queen g6, queen takes g6, knight takes g6, knight takes b7, white equalizes the material and gets probably into an equal endgame. Maybe not really a better position, but an equal endgame with good chances, actually. But still, Lasker was not thinking that this position should end up in a draw, so he continued after knight to c4 with the move queen to d5, attacking the knight on c4, and meanwhile taking a very nice looking active square for that queen. So white just continued with knight to e3, and black just went with the move queen to b5. So what should do white now? This is a very interesting position. The bishop on g5 is being threatened. It seems that there are no particular threats for white. He doesn't have any additional resources to make some decisive threats against black's position. But still, Torre was considering what to play in this position still from the early combination with b2 to b4, and now here happens the most beautiful, in my opinion, combination of the 20th century, the so-called windmill. So you can of course try it on yourself and try to find the best variation that Torre found. But however, just let me show you, if black didn't go with a move like queen b5 and he plays a move like queen takes d4, then he also fails to save the game. Actually, this is not only a bad position, this is a lost position for black already. White plays rook to d1, and when black retrieves the queen, there will be bishop takes h6 on the way. So now threatening on g7, black will be forced to take on the opportunity of knight g6, but then bishop g5 comes, and then threatening rook to h3, white's threats will be really very strong. So maybe queen takes b4, but then rook to h3, probably, or even in this position, yeah, rook to h3 works very well, and the main problem will be that now if black plays some simple move like queen c5, there will be a beautiful checkmate after queen h7, and now queen to h8, with following rook takes h8 and mate. So white's threats are really enough on the king, and that's why black didn't want to go into these lines with queen takes d4, so he just chose to retreat the queen on b5 and follow his idea. So here comes the main idea that Torre promoted. Bishop to f6. A very beautiful and amazing move. The main idea is that now the bishop is taking a very strong position on f6, and white is actually sacrificing a queen. So practically, since the queen on b5 is now being threatened, and together with this the pawn on g7 is also under attack, black is forced to take on h5, and now white just continued with rook takes g7 check. So here it happens, the windmill. Black plays king h8, and white takes on f7 with the rook and discovers the check against black's king. So now black has to play king to g8, and the rook is now going back to the g7 position with a check. So practically now, with each move, white is taking a piece of black and going on the same position at g7, and black has no way to save himself from that. So this windmill is really very strong, and there are some similar positions like this, but this was the initial game from where that combination, that type of combination, took its name. So rook g7, king h8, and now rook takes b7 with a check. So now the rook works like a cyclone on the 7th rank, and of course, after rook king g8, the rook goes back, king h8, and now white simply went with the rook to g5 check. Discovered the check, and white simply takes back the queen by equalizing the material and actually going with a position with a bishop and 2 pawns up. So of course black is getting his bishop back by playing king to g6, but still there are too many pawns, and for the bishop white is actually getting one more. Rook h3, king takes and rook takes h6. So now white has 3 more pawns and of course a totally winning game. So the game continued with some more moves like king g5, rook h3, rook e to b8. Lasker tried to do something but not really anything significant. Rook g3, white is just making black's king to go in some uncomfortable position. Rook f3 and meanwhile improving the position of the rook. So king g6 was played and a3. In such winning positions, it's good to stabilize the position with some simple move, avoiding all of the threats that the opponent may achieve, like counter chances. So after a3, black tried a5, but still not really enough to save the game. B takes a, rook takes a5, knight c4. So now the rook and the pawn are attacked, and black is forced to go with the move rook to d5. So now I just continued with the move rook f4, and one more threat appeared to black. The threat is that white wants to, in some appropriate moment, to transfer the rook up to e3, and eventually that king will feel very bad on the g6 square, because it will happen into a kind of a mating web with rook to g3 check. And meanwhile, that knight on f8 cannot really become free because of the weakness on e6. So after that move rook to f4, black just continued with knight to d7, trying to set this knight free, but still, after rook takes e6, knight king g5 and pawn to g3, making the threat of h4 next move, and probably some more mating threats will arise because black's king on h5 will have no squares available. This was a really amazing game. Perhaps Lasker had this game in mind when the venerable ex-world champion wrote, "Torre's first steps in the chess world are really exactly those of a potential world champion." Unfortunately, the chess life of the young Mexican master was cut short that year when at the age of 22 he gave up chess forever. Brief of his career in top chess level, Torre left behind not only some beautiful games, but also this very interesting system of development, which has since become known as the Torre attack. So I hope this game was very instructive to you, and you can use some of the basic ideas that Torre used in order to create this masterpiece, and also try to make one in your own games. Thank you very much.